The Young and the Restless spoilers next 2 week October 20 to October 31st, 2025. The week in Genoa City was supposed to be filled with celebration and closure, love rekindled, vows renewed, and past mistakes finally forgiven. But as always in this town, every smile came with a shadow. Beneath the champagne and laughter, tension simmered. The stage was set for chaos, and three stories would intertwine in a storm of temptation, betrayal, and nostalgia that no one would see coming. It began innocently enough with Tessa Porter. She had been working harder than ever, performing at the GCAC, balancing motherhood and music, and the weight of expectations that came with being part of the Newman family. But on this particular night, exhaustion blurred into recklessness. The lights were low, the crowd enthusiastic, and the glasses of wine kept coming. Each toast from well-meaning friends dulled her edges until she didn't notice how unsteady her steps had become. By the time the party faded and the music stopped, she was no longer the polished artist who had it all under control. She was a woman unraveling quietly under the glow of empty glamour. As she made her way toward the staircase leading to the upper suites, her heel caught the carpet, her body tilted, and in a flash of panic she felt herself falling. But before she hit the ground, a hand reached out to a firm, steady, familiar. Daniel Romalotti caught her just in time. "Easy," he murmured, steadying her as her world spun. She looked up, her eyes glassy, her laugh soft and disoriented. "You saved me," she whispered, her voice warm with alcohol and nostalgia. Daniel smiled awkwardly, helping her stand straight. He had always admired Tessa's strength, the way she carried her emotions through music, the way she seemed untouched by the chaos that consumed everyone else. But tonight she looked fragile, human in a way that pulled something deep in him. She lingered too long in his arms, the air between them thick with unspoken tension. Then, almost without thinking, she tilted her face toward his and kissed him. It wasn't planned, it wasn't slow, it was impulsive, electric, and completely wrong. Daniel froze, startled, before gently pulling back. But the damage was done. In that split second, everything around them shifted. The woman he once saw as his friend now became a symbol of temptation and guilt. Tessa, realizing what she'd done, stumbled away, her hand covering her mouth as reality hit her. She whispered an apology that sounded more like a confession before disappearing down the hallway, leaving Daniel staring after her, shaken and breathless. He knew it meant nothing, or at least, it should have meant nothing, but in Genoa City, nothing ever stayed secret. While Daniel tried to process the moment, chaos was brewing elsewhere. At the jazz club downtown, Christine Blair's bachelorette party was in full swing. The atmosphere was light, the music smooth, and for once, the women of Genoa City seemed united in laughter instead of rivalry. Lauren Fenmore raised her glass to toast the bride-to-be, while Tracy Abbott offered warm words about second chances and lasting love. Victoria and Abby exchanged knowing smiles as Diane Jenkins joined them, keeping the peace despite her complicated history with almost everyone in the room. For a brief moment, it felt like harmony, until Phyllis Summers appeared at the top of the stairs. The room fell silent. Every head turned, every pair of eyes widened with a mixture of disbelief and irritation. Phyllis, radiant and unapologetic, descended the stairs like she owned the night. "Oh, don't all stop on my account," she said with a sly smile, her red dress shimmering under the lights. "This place could use a little excitement." Lauren's jaw clenched, Victoria muttered something under her breath, and Tracy exchanged an exasperated glance with Diane. Christine, or Cricket as everyone once knew her, took a step forward, her calm smile masking the familiar dread. "Phyllis, what are you doing here?" she asked, her tone firm but polite. Phyllis tilted her head, feigning innocence. "What, this is a private party. I thought everyone who ever loved, hated, or tolerated you was welcome." The sarcasm dripped like honey. Lauren sighed loudly, Abby rolled her eyes, and the tension in the room spiked. But Phyllis thrived on tension. She poured herself a drink, raised it to the room, and said, "Congratulations, Christine. Truly. I mean that. You've managed to keep a man for longer than a fiscal quarter. I'm impressed. Gasps filled the air, but Christine only smiled tightly. You don't belong here, Phyllis, she said. Maybe not, Phyllis replied, her eyes glinting, but then again, when have I ever needed an invitation? While the ladies of Genoa City dealt with one of Phyllis's classic intrusions, across the country in Los Angeles, Kyle Abbott was having a night of his own, and it was about to change everything he thought he knew about loyalty. He had traveled for business and wanted nothing more than a quiet evening before returning home, but fate had other plans. Standing on the balcony of his hotel's rooftop restaurant, he looked across the softly lit terrace and froze. There, just a few tables away, sat Holden Novak and Sienna Bacall. The sight of them together was enough to make his pulse quicken. Holden, once a trusted friend, leaned close to Sienna, his expression animated, intimate. She laughed, that unmistakable, seductive laugh that carried through the air like a challenge. Kyle couldn't look away. The chemistry between them was undeniable, and the implications were dangerous. What were they doing here together, hundreds of miles from Genoa City, whispering in the dark like conspirators? The Abbott instinct, that mix of curiosity and protectiveness, surged in him. He stepped closer, careful not to draw attention. That's when he heard footsteps behind him. Claire Newman appeared, her voice gentle but curious. Kyle? What are you doing out here? He didn't turn immediately, his eyes still fixed on Holden and Sienna. The real question, he said slowly, is what Holden's doing, and who he's doing it with. Claire followed his gaze, her eyes widening as she saw what he saw. Oh my God, she whispered. Back at the jazz club, Phyllis's uninvited performance had reached its crescendo. She made a show of clinking her glass against the bar, offering unsolicited advice on marriage, love, and survival in Genoa City. Ladies, she declared dramatically, if you think marriage solves your problems, you're not married to the right man. Or the wrong one. Christine sighed, clearly done. Phyllis, this is my night, she said, her patience cracking. Then make it memorable, Phyllis shot back with a wink. Security eventually escorted her out, but not before she left the guests whispering and shaking their heads. Typical Phyllis, always finding a way to turn someone else's spotlight into her own. Later that evening, as Daniel walked Tessa back to her suite to ensure she was safe, guilt weighed on both of them. The hallway was quiet, the city beyond their window glowing with indifferent light. We can't tell anyone, Tessa said softly, her words slurred but sincere. Daniel nodded. No one needs to know. But secrets had a half-life in Genoa City, they never stayed buried long. Someone always saw, always heard, always told. And in the distance, a shadow moved, a photographer, a whisperer, someone waiting to sell the next scandal to the highest bidder. Meanwhile, Kyle and Claire's discovery of Holden and Sienna wasn't as innocent as it seemed. As they watched from the balcony, they noticed a briefcase under Holden's chair, marked with the Abbott family's confidential crest. Whatever was happening wasn't personal. It was business, and possibly betrayal. Claire placed a hand on Kyle's arm. You can't jump to conclusions, she warned, but Kyle's expression hardened. When it comes to my family, he said, there's no such thing as coincidence. By the end of the night, Genoa City and Los Angeles shared the same storm, one made of secrets, old flames, and dangerous choices. Tessa would wake the next morning with regret clouding her mind, wondering if the kiss with Daniel was a mistake or a hidden truth. Daniel would question whether his loyalty to Lily or his complicated friendship with Heather could survive what just happened. Phyllis would pretend her little stunt at the jazz club was harmless fun, even as whispers about her obsession with Christine reignited. And Kyle would return home with more questions than answers, the image of Holden and Sienna etched into his mind like a warning. But the most dangerous part of all was that none of them realized how connected their actions were. The kiss, the confrontation, the secret meeting, threads of the same web that would soon pull them all into another spiral of deception. In Genoa City, every scandal starts as a whisper and ends as a war, and the war was about to begin again. Jack Abbott stood by the window of his office, the familiar skyline of Genoa City stretching before him like a battlefield he'd fought on too many times before. The city had changed, people had changed, but the cycle of ambition, betrayal, and redemption never truly ended. The Abbott legacy was once again at risk, this time not from an outside corporation or a hostile takeover, but from the fragmentation within his own family. Billy had drifted too far, consumed by emotion, reckless decisions, and now tangled in a romance that had quietly complicated everything. Sally Spector was brilliant, bold, and resourceful, but her impulsive act of reaching out to Jill Abbott for funding behind Billy's back had fractured the fragile trust between them. Jack understood business better than anyone, but he also understood pride, and Billy's pride had been wounded again. He knew that his younger brother was spinning, balancing between anger and exhaustion, and that was precisely the moment when Kane Ashby chose to resurface. Once the town's golden boy turned outcast, Kane had returned with something dangerous as motivation. Revenge had sharpened him, and Jack could feel the storm coming. That was why he had summoned Billy to the office that morning. When Billy arrived, his expression was closed off, his energy defensive, as though he had already prepared to reject anything Jack might say. The bruises of past arguments still lingered between them, accusations of betrayal, leadership struggles at Jabot, old romantic resentments that never fully healed. But Jack didn't speak immediately. He let the silence stretch until Billy finally asked, "What's this about?" Jack turned, his tone calm but commanding. "It's about family. And it's about Kane Ashby." Billy sighed, already annoyed. "I'm not interested in rehashing ancient history. Kane can try whatever he wants. He's irrelevant." Jack shook his head slowly. "That's where you're wrong. Irrelevant men don't plot revenge. They disappear. Kane hasn't disappeared, he's aligning forces, talking to investors who still resent us, whispering in the right ears. He's not gone. He's just patient." The logic was undeniable, but Billy wasn't ready to admit it. He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "You think we need to team up again? After everything?" Jack's gaze softened. "We don't have to like it. We just have to be smart." Billy looked away, the weight of those words pressing hard. The truth was, he hadn't been feeling smart lately. Sally's secret meeting with Jill had humiliated him. He'd defended her creativity, her instincts, her resilience, and now he felt like a fool. Even if Jill meant well, the gesture had exposed cracks in both his business and his relationship. Jack could sense it. He stepped closer, his tone lowering. "I know you're angry with Sally. And with Jill. But anger doesn't solve problems, Billy. It creates openings for people like Kane." Billy scoffed. "You think Kane's coming for me? For us?" Jack didn't blink. "I think Kane's coming for everything Abbott. He's had years to plan how to make us pay for cutting him out. He's always been manipulative, but now he's unpredictable. And unpredictable men are dangerous." There was silence, only broken by the quiet hum of the city beyond the glass. Billy wanted to argue, but he couldn't. Somewhere deep down, he knew Jack was right. Jack continued, softer now. "You and I have been at odds for too long. But if we don't reconnect, if we don't stand together, Kane will exploit every weakness we have. You know how he works. He'll start with sympathy, make himself look like the victim, and before we know it, he'll have investors whispering that the Abbotts have lost their touch." Billy paced, his agitation building. "You make it sound like he's some criminal mastermind. He's just a disgraced businessman with too much time." Jack smiled faintly. "So were half the men who destroyed this company in the past." The reminder cut deep. Billy fell silent. He remembered too many times when arrogance blinded him, when he thought he could handle things his own way only to drag the family through hell. He wasn't ready to admit it aloud, but he needed his brother just as Jack needed him. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away, the other half of Genoa City was chasing both pleasure and disaster in Los Angeles. What was meant to be a brief escape, a week of business and leisure, had turned into a nightmare for Nick Newman and his family. Noah's accident had shattered the illusion of safety. The crash report made little sense. The car had gone off the road at a sharp turn, crashing down into a ravine, but the details didn't align with simple driver error. The authorities were calling it a tragic accident caused by fatigue, but Nick's gut told him otherwise. The more he studied the evidence, the clearer it became that something darker was at play. The damaged guardrail showed signs of impact from the rear of Noah's car, as if he had been pushed. The tire tracks ended abruptly before the descent, not from braking, but from losing control. Detective Burrow, a seasoned investigator brought in from Los Angeles PD, met with Nick at the hospital. He didn't say much, but the tone of his questions made Nick uneasy. Burrow mentioned inconsistencies in the mechanical report and hinted at the possibility of deliberate tampering. "I'm not saying foul play," the detective said carefully, "but I'm not ruling it out." That one sentence was enough to ignite Nick's determination. For him, this wasn't just an accident anymore, it was an attack. And if someone had targeted Noah, then it wasn't random. It was personal. Nick spent the next day retracing Noah's steps, questioning witnesses, and checking traffic cameras. There was one name that kept surfacing in whispers, an unidentified driver seen speeding away from the crash site. The police had no leads, but one witness, a trucker who had been making a late delivery, had called in the initial report. Nick tracked him down at a roadside diner outside Malibu. The man was shaken, nervous even after recounting his story several times. "I saw the car," he said quietly, "and I saw another one behind it. Black SUV. It didn't stop when the other went off the road." That was enough for Nick. He called Burrow immediately, but the detective's response was cautious. "We'll look into it," he promised, but Nick knew the tone of bureaucratic hesitation when he heard it. He'd been through too many investigations where truth got lost in paperwork. So, he took matters into his own hands. He checked security feeds from gas stations along the route. It took hours, but finally, he found it. A grainy clip of a dark SUV following Noah's car minutes before the crash. The license plate was partially obscured, but there was something familiar about the way it moved, the rhythm of its pursuit. Back in Genoa City, Jack received a call from Nick later that evening. It wasn't just family courtesy, it was a warning. Jack listened as Nick explained the growing suspicion that someone had intentionally forced Noah's car off the road. The connection might not have seemed clear yet, but Jack's instincts flared. If Kane Ashby was truly back and stirring old grudges, and if he had allies in Los Angeles's business world, then maybe the chaos surrounding the Newmans wasn't separate from the pressure building on the Abbotts. Genoa City had always been a web, every feud connected, every scheme overlapping. That night, Billy sat alone in his apartment, staring at a half-empty glass of bourbon, wrestling with everything Jack had said. Sally entered quietly, her eyes searching his face. She wanted to explain her meeting with Jill, to make him understand it came from desperation, not deceit. But Billy wasn't ready. "You went behind my back," he said flatly. "Do you know how that looks?" Sally's voice trembled slightly. "I did it for us as Billy. We needed funding, and Jill believes in what we're building." Billy exhaled sharply, the tension in him raw. "You should have believed in me." He turned away, his reflection in the window fractured by city lights, wondering how many times he'd stood in this exact emotional ruin. At Jabot, Jack looked at the empty hallway outside his office after Billy left earlier, and a thought haunted him: family always breaks itself before outsiders ever have to. He wasn't going to let that happen again. He opened his phone, scrolling through messages until he found Kane's new number, a rumor confirmed by one of his contacts. Jack didn't call, but he saved it. There would be a time soon when he'd have to. And in Los Angeles, as Nick returned to the hospital, the world he thought he understood had shifted again. Noah lay motionless under the harsh light of machines, his pulse steady but fragile. Nick touched his son's hand and swore silently that whoever had done this would pay. Burrow arrived moments later, a folder in hand, his face unreadable. "We found the SUV," he said quietly. "Registered to a company in Genoa City." Nick's breath caught. He didn't say it aloud, but the implication was clear: the danger wasn't random and it wasn't over. Back home, the Abbott brothers prepared for another war while the Newmans faced the storm of their own. Two families, forever intertwined, were once again on parallel paths, fighting ghosts of their past, protecting what little innocence they had left, and unknowingly walking straight into each other's crossfire. In Genoa City, peace was only ever the pause between betrayals, and that pause was already ending.